So, welcome back again. We meet yet again, unexpectedly so, but this thing is going strong. Welcome back, Anu.
Hmm.
So, something that we did not announce last week was what book we were going to read. It's going to be a surprise, and it is indeed a surprise. Anup ended up deciding we would be reading Fyodor Dostoevsky because our life is already not sad enough. And the book we ended up for was The Notes from the Underground, kind of a short, uh, I would not say novella, but short book and an interesting read. Uh, but before going into the book, I just want to ask all of, I hope everything's going well in your life because all the books you are recommending these days are kind of really existential.
No, yeah, the reason that I recommended Fyodor Dostoevsky was I already read like three, four books from him, right? And I find those readings always, like Jordan B. Peterson says, like transformative,
Mm-mm,
right? Like changes your thoughts, I think, and it changes you like along reading those books, I guess. So it was a short work, right? It was like relatively short than his other works, like 180 pages, I think.
mm-mm,
Hmm. And interesting.
mm. So it was quite interesting. I found it interesting as well. I've I've always found Dostoevsky to be a bit of a difficult read, as the his writings are very, very long, so I don't try to venture into it. But this was kind of short, and I really enjoyed uh, the length of it. To say, uh, let's start with you this time because it's always me who's blabbering on. I just want you to tell your impression of the book in general.
Hmm. So like the first two, three sentences of the book is like really interesting, right? Like where it says like I am a sick person and stuff like that. And I don't know, like that straightly catch my attention. And then I started thinking, okay, like this book is gonna be an interesting book.
Mm-mm,
Yeah, but then the first chapter, like it was kind of confusing. Like I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of things to grasp, right?
mm-mm,
So some things I didn't even understood, so I had to go back again and then read it again, like for two, three
mm-mm,
times to understand it.
mm-mm.
And I think after second chapter, it kind of got normal, and yeah, so a lot of things, and um, yeah, yeah. How did you like it?
For me, it was a very interesting read. Like the way the book is framed, there's a first part, there's a second part, and I would say there's a third part, even though the book says it's part one and two.
Mm,
And I felt in a way that I could relate to the character, not in the sense that, oh, I'm like that character. I don't think of myself as being completely despicable, but
mm,
I liked that the the words in the books, the storytelling, at least the feelings the writer expresses is kind of like the dark side of me, like the dark corners in my mind that
mm,
has those uh, thoughts in my head and the hubris as well as the inferiority complex, the superiority complex, and all those complex emotions, all those negative
mm,
emotions that the writer speaks about. I have felt them sometimes in my life, not all the times, but you can say that to some extent I have been, uh, yeah, kind of a bad person myself in my head, and a lot of the times I just try to walk through it and not always be able to uh, remove them from my thoughts, So the book was in general like a condensed form of all the negative thoughts that you have as a person. And I think, I don't know, I can't say for other people how they think, but at least for myself, I could at least relate to some part of it, some sensation of it. And the first part felt like a justification of whatever happened in the later one, kind of like he was trying to prime everybody up for what is what we're going to read later on and kind of justify it beforehand. And it's something that I think we are all guilty of to some extent, and that was a really fascinating read. The starting was kind of like, okay, is this going to be a philosophical book? It's only going to be philosophy, or something's going to happen, and then stuff start happening, and then felt more and more natural. Kind of the book tied itself up, and it was really interesting. I really enjoyed the way the
Mm.
book went by.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned justification. Like, I think last week we had that with Dr. Jekyll and Clyde, right? Like, where he justifies in the end of the book, and now like it's straight in the beginning, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of things that the writer, the narrator, speaks about at the start, like how a man is not whatever he thinks he is. He discusses about consciousness and how a person can is kind of governed by the supernatural in a sense, or an evolutionary instinct in a sense, is kind of a justification of the acts he does later on, where he can't decide on anything. And in a way, I can understand that, because how I think as well is that I feel myself there are some activities like addictions in a sense are kind of a part where you are acting beyond your control, right? And I think the writer also addresses that a lot of actions that we do are not completely in our control, and a lot of time we are kind of fighting within ourselves with different personas to find a convincing solution to it or convincing decision to it. And there are some experiments that have even proved that this is how our brain actually works, that our brain is not a single constituent that makes all the decisions, but there are five or six different horizons which make their own independent decision. There is kind of like a single, I would say, the strongest part of you that at the end brings out the decision. And I think he highlights that in the sense that if you're a person of science, then you'll probably believe on this thing, but if you're a person of religion, then you'll probably believe on having your independent decision making in a sense. And so all those discussion, all those philosophical discussions about this, I felt was kind of a starting point. I was kind of confused why is he talking about all this kind of stuff, and he goes all over the place with the philosophies. You know, he's not a very reliable narrator. There's no sync to what he's saying at the start, but those
Mm.
kind of things kind of start justifying itself later on, the more you read into it and the more he narrates the events that happens in his life. And I don't know how you felt, but I once finished the book and then read the first few chapters again and just kind of tied the things in the first few chapters like a prologue of the whole story itself.
Mm. Mm. I know what I mean. I did the rereading part again, but for me
Mm-mm,
the reason was different, you know. So like I would read the book like 20 pages, and then I
mm-mm,
would do something else, and then I would come back, and then I would forgot the point where I was, right? Because
mm-mm.
I it seems like I didn't get the context until that point. So I was re-repeating it all the time, you know, like
Yeah.
basically two, three times. And then later on I started actually counting the pages. So then I knew in which I left in.
Yeah.
So
That
the
that
reading part was all
please.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think the writer has just written like how you think about it, you know, and you know about a train of thoughts. Sometimes you just start
Mm,
your train of thought from somewhere, and then it just ends you to something else. I remember once, even we were having a conversation about something as mundane as some kind of some movie, I think, and then we went into existentialism, and then to goals and hobbies and so on. So, because a person's thought is not kind of as streamlined as how we think of it is, and it scatters all over the place. I think that's why also how the writer has written it in such a way, because at the end it's a note from the guy who's underground. So when you write your notes, you just write whatever comes to your mind first, and you don't really get time to organize your thoughts. And
mm,
I have felt this even when I write sometimes, even when we do this meeting, that at first our conversations are kind of coarse, they are kind of turbulent, they're not really directed to somewhere, but more you work on it, then more directed it becomes. And so
mm,
at the end, you kind of get to the flow of, so uh, for people who are wondering, we are basically just thinking about how the story flows. We haven't even gotten into the story yet, and so that's just how kind of complex the book was. At least for us as novice readers, I would say we are like just
mm.
reading for pleasure, and we're not really reading to analyze this thing. Or at least I don't expect my life to change by reading these books.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in the
Uh,
content itself, if you want to say something, then please.
No, no, tell me, tell me. First, like, finish what you were saying, and then
Yeah.
I'll come.
So about the content itself, how did you find the content, at least the story that happens in the part two, basically?
Look, like in all of the books that I read, I actually feel with the protagonist, right? So he is doing something, he is thinking something, he is reading something, he is performing some sort of action. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like, I imagine it to be me, right? So I imagine it from my perspective, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
all the stories. But in this case, like I didn't because I I don't know, like for me, like this protagonist, he was like a really confused person. Like he wanted to
Mm-hmm.
fit in so much, right? But
Mm-hmm.
he would like mess it up himself. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the times he would actually make like causality and that stuff. Like he would kind
Mm-hmm.
of think that there is a deeper intricacies to something which is a totally normal act,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, there was this one instance like where he was kind of like trying to prove his point by I don't know, like by pushing away a general or something like that, and it was not
Mm-hmm.
even like this general. He was not even I don't know. He was not even like trying to do it, right? It was just a random action what he did. Like so, I don't know like how it was written in English. I read it in German, but basically
Mm-hmm.
what it means is, yeah, he kind of like is on the way, and the general kind of like just casually, like moves him aside, and then he goes through something like that, and he
Mm-hmm.
takes it that as an offense, and then like he starts to stalk the general and
Mm-hmm.
everything to
Mm-hmm.
recreate the situation where he can kind of pay him back, right? Like by
Mm-hmm.
kind of doing the same thing or something like that. And that
Mm-hmm.
for me felt like extremely, I don't know, like different, like kind of delusional, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, at those situations, I kind of felt like, why is he making this stuff? Like
Mm-hmm.
this cringe feeling,
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyways, like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I understand some of the actions are kind of over the top, but I think that
Mm,
the whole point is to make it so that these actions are over the top. The thing that
yeah.
I could relate is the way he rationalizes all of these things, and his thoughts are he's not very decisive as a character, and he
Mm,
kind of has this uh, feeling that he cannot come to a conclusion of whatever he wants, right? So I thought that I could relate to the character to some extent is that he's not very decisive and he tries to overthink the situation. But yeah, a lot of actions he takes is kind of okay. Why is he doing that? However, when I think the character, in a sense, has not had enough experience of life, and has more often just been limited inside the realm of books, and he's been isolated from the world. And I think that he says that in the book itself that he's been isolated, and everything that happens is kind of a consequence of it because he has read a lot of books. He knows the theory of how stuffs work, probably how society works, how interpersonal relationships work, but he's not really experienced with it. So he's just thinking everything through, and he has not gathered enough social experience to know how to deal with certain situations. And in a sense that kind of makes sense because just think about it, you don't know, you are quite adept as a social being now, but there are probably situations that happen in your life that you kind of overthink through them and then can't come to a suitable conclusion and probably do something stupid, and might not be something as simple as trying to stalk a guy to be able to get dashed with him, as we would say,
mm,
try to hit him on his road. But it's probably something that's very simple, and you look back to it and think, why was I even doing that? But you were doing it because you didn't have enough experience in your life regarding that situation, right? You probably there was a conflict, or there was probably some kind of yeah event that happened in your life that was too big for you to
mm,
comprehend. It was too complex. I wouldn't say complex, but it was too. how do I say, inexperienced for you, and you were not really sure about what the consequences will be. So you were kind of overcooking it inside your head.
Well, definitely there have been this kind of situations, I guess, but like, I was rather young,
Mm,
I would say, right? Like when I thought of this stuff. So, some event happens, and then I think like, okay, yeah, the universe is conspiring against me or
mm,
something like
mm,
that, right? So, these thoughts came to me as I was a child or as I was a teenager, I guess, and
mm,
also doing some random stuffs, which doesn't random stuff as in like inviting yourself to a dinner party or something like that.
mm,
Those are also stuff like I felt like really uneasy as I read
mm,
that,
mm,
because I don't know, like, yeah, I
mm,
wouldn't do that, I guess. So,
mm,
it was like really, really awkward situation for me, like to even read about it, like it felt like really uneasy to me. But
mm,
anyways, these are stuffs that I think most of the people go through during their childhood or during their teenager time, and
mm,
they start like growing, like let's say they start to grow over those things, right?
yep.
They just grow mentally, I guess. That's what I wanted to say. And yeah, like, a lot of irrational stuff were happening, and I couldn't somehow like justify his actions and his thoughts together. Like he
Mm,
thought differently, but he acted differently. And
mm,
yeah, for me, it was like really confusing. All the actions
mm,
that he did till the end, I guess.
mm.
Yeah.
I think that was the essence of the writer. So I think he was going for that, that there would be people who would not really relate to him because these actions are so out of the ordinary that it
Mm,
was kind of questioning for everyone. And we're even though we read from the perspective of the protagonist himself, I think we are
mm,
reacting more from the other characters who are there and not really relating to the protagonist. For example, I think I could relate to the three friends who are there more than with this protagonist when he's kind of drunk in the uh,
mm,
cafe, and then he's kind of being rude to everybody. Is you're feeling sad for the other characters and not really for the protagonist, even though you know what he's thinking about it, you know his rationalization. I think there's an empathetic side in me that kind of, okay, I really understand that he's making a fool of himself and feel sympathy for him, but
mm.
I could also feel sympathy to the other characters and try to, you know,
Yeah,
see that
definitely,
they're
definitely.
they're put in a really uncomfortable situation there.
Definitely. Like for me, like, what the protagonist did was weird because it was the last day that they met, right? Like it was
Mm,
a farewell party kind of, and
mm,
he was not connected with any of those, right? So instead of like just like leaving it, he invites himself, and even though they're like, is like, no, no, I will come and I will be there.
mm, mm,
And then like how he justifies himself is now that he has said it, he needs to go there. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like
mm.
it was not even, I don't know, like the reasons were really immature, I guess.
Yeah, well, I could understand. Like he said, I'll be there. So the next day, even though he doesn't want to be there, he goes there. I'm sure you have been to different situation where you said, okay, I'm going to do it. You don't really want to do it later on, but because you have given your word, you have to be there. And I think it's a kind of that thing that the older you get, it's easier for you to kind of back down from whatever you have said, right? Or to prepare yourself better for whatever you have said. But when you're younger, you still can't decide on should I really go there, should I not go there? I don't really want to get there.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. It's as I told before, like, this kind of stuff's like proving a point, like you do this
Yeah,
if you are a child or in a teenager phase, but like
yeah.
you're an outgrown man, it was different, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, at least what I liked about this book was I feel the reason why I feel that the main character didn't have enough social interaction or a social practice to act in a certain way is how he starts acting more and more. He interacts with other people. For example, he interacts with a girl later on, right? And then, yeah, he gives this really long uh, text about a really long sermon about
Right,
yeah.
right, right,
That was like
right.
what the hell are you? You just met this girl for
It
the
was like
first time.
2
Why are you
pages long,
saying
right? It
all
was
this
like
thing,
two, 3
right?
pages long. Oh my
Exactly. It was really long, and then
God.
later on, he feels kind of light after having this saying. In a sense, I felt he was speaking for himself and his experiences that happened to him, and not so
Mm,
much about the girl herself. And he feels kind of light, and then he's back at his place, and then he's overthinking about, oh, what did I say to this girl? I felt like sending that risky text that you do. Sometimes you send a risky text to a girl, and then she doesn't reply back to you for some time. Then you kind of think, oh, did I did something stupid or not? I think it was Dostoevsky's version of risky text, but
okay.
I could understand that he was getting more practice with mm, more people, and then he was kind of
Mm,
figuring out. And he even writes that when he had this really, he could uh, speak his heart out. The next day, he's feeling much better, and then he writes this really good, elegant letter to his friend, with whom he was rude to the previous evening, apologized to him, and even he there's a sense of lucidity in his mind that he's very kind of clear, and he doesn't feel the text don't feel like he's kind of confused. Before that, all the text feels like he's kind of confused. He's not sure if I should do this, if I should not do this, and he's doing certain actions even though he doesn't want to do it. But the next day, after having that long conversation with the girl, he can kind of say whatever he writes. He's thinking more clearly, and the only time it kind of boils up again is when the girl does not come back to his address, and then he's again burned inside. And
mm,
I feel it's kind of an indecisiveness from the writer's point of view because he hasn't had enough experience of doing stuff, and the world he sees is more in imagination, in books where he's kind of uh, left to solitude, and not so much really had the interaction with other people to know that people don't really care about what you do as long as you are well mannered and then you are a pleasant you're a good listener, then that's all you need to make social interactions, right? So yeah, it felt kind of like the more practice he had, the more he spoke with the girl, with his colleagues, he mellowed down a bit more, and then yeah, kind of to reinforce that point, he also has this big confrontation with the person who works for him, and then once the girl is there, he kind of mellows down to the person as well and try to be more reasonable with him and not be so engulfed in solitude. So I felt, in a sense, that it was kind of like a situation where a person is kind of trapped inside himself. He's really engulfed in solitude, and there are a lot of feelings inside his head that he cannot give out or express to him, be vulnerable with anybody. And the more he goes on and becomes vulnerable, the more uh, mellow he becomes, and his thoughts are much more clear, and he can kind of rationalize the actions, like he can do his actions and also be able to think about them clearly. I hope you didn't feel like the narrator speaking with the girl, in this case
But I mean,
me, that
like in the end, it seems like he didn't learn anything out of this, right? Like in the end, like Lisa comes in his place, and she is actually like trying to connect with him, and he's like, yeah, no, go away. Right? So, I mean, like sometimes I think it's you can also interpret it like maybe he was getting on his way all the time,
yeah.
right? So he had a lot of opportunities to learn, but he just decided not to, right? Like he just decided to say, like, okay, no, I have like this bad and evil side in me, and I let it flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. Like while the society
Mm,
may also be in fault, like at his behavior, like partially it's also his own decisions and own actions that led him to that situations,
mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
no, no.
I kind of feel because probably I am more akin to the narrator that I can relate to him. I have not been as crazy as him, but a lot of thoughts he has written in the book are something that has crossed my mind sometimes throughout the period, right? Much more when I was a lot younger, 10 years before, but not, but these have been in my mind, and I've also been kind of flimsy on my thoughts and actions because I didn't have enough experience to know that it's okay to be wrong, it's okay to fail or stuff like that, and when you are not really educated in how to dealing with rejection and how to dealing with uh, failure, you kind of have this uh, real difficulty to crystallize your thoughts, crystallize your actions, and you always want to have an open escape route so that you can always never fault yourself and more so fault other people. And that's a common theme of the narrator. He's always faulting other characters and not himself. He's not willing to take the responsibility of his actions. And probably after reading that, it kind of I could smile and then think, okay, yeah, that's kind of how I used to think 10 years before. Try to always leave myself open to some kind of excuse to any failures I made because yeah, naturally nobody wants to be a failure, but uh, you kind of always want to avoid the sense of taking responsibilities.
Mm, No, like I mean, like that's also pretty normal, I guess. Like what I what I found interesting was like this thought of like, okay, everybody is conspiring against me. Like it's
Mm,
not that you are avoiding, that you're kind of thinking like, yeah, I'm running away from my mistakes. Like, or I'm not seeing my mistakes, but rather the second point. Like
mm,
yeah, like this general, he was trying to kind of like confront me or something like that.
mm, mm.
That's
Yeah,
just not the case, right? Like, they don't care about you like as an individual, right? Like they just care about themselves. I
yeah,
think like yeah, it's also lack of human contact, human touch, I think.
yeah,
To be so self-centered, I can imagine,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And just to, from my point of view, to finally like under like the final note from my side would be that the narrator also suffers from a lot of inferiority complex in a sense that
uh,
he feels he's inferior to everybody else, and then he tries to compensate that with his uh, yeah usual like I'm better than you are. You have to
mm,
ask for my friendship and not the other way around. And I wanted to. So he's really inferior. He feels inferior to other people, so he tries to act
mm,
like he's superior to everybody else, and then
mm,
there's a detachment of uh, how the world sees him because people can clearly see if you feel you're not strong, then
mm,
it can be seen, and that's how other people interact with him as well. So
mm,
that part was very interesting for me. Is that we see different phases of inferiority complex represented a lot in writing, right?
mm,
There's famously the story by B.P. Koirala called Dosi Chasma, which speaks about inferiority complex in Nepali, but this one I think is very realistic in the sense that the guy he's feeling inferior to everybody else, but he doesn't because he feels he's inferior, he's really brooding and he's always down. So to lift
mm,
himself up, he wants to feel superior, but it
mm,
is in disconnect with how he actually sees the world or how he experiences the world. So he's all again put back to his place of feeling inferiority, and it's kind of like a bipolar situation where he's moving from one set of thoughts to the other set of thoughts, or one kind of personality to another kind of personality, and he keeps flip flopping, and kind of everything else is a consequence of it. And I think that at the end, when he speaks about Lisa and he kind of dismisses her, try to break her heart, is all. It also comes from that because only few pages before you read him dreaming about trying to make this girl his wife and then try to have her. But now at the end, when she's in front of her, he can't take the action, and I think that and he has a lot of regrets about it because he also writes that he never saw her again, and he kind of regrets that he never saw her again. So that was that was really interesting to see how the writer had written this character who feels this inferiority complex, and he's also really indecisive, and there's this all complex emotions or thoughts inside him. But what I also like is he's clearly an intelligent guy because he thinks very clearly and he thinks stuff through. He tries to think them through, and he thinks of different scenarios. And for sure, like he thinks a lot, but oftentimes we think that people who think a lot are probably much better off, but probably
Mhm.
they are not so much better off because they're always thinking and not really doing anything to gather all
Yeah,
the
definitely.
experience.
Yeah, I think there was a mixture, I guess. Like he is inferior, but like he still feels like also mentally superior to the other people, right? So at the same time, he feels inferior, but also at the same time, he also feels superior.
Mm-mm,
So I don't know, like I feel like this person was confused in every scenario possible,
mm-mm.
mentally, physically, socially, So
I think we should do one segment from now on. Every book we
mm,
read, every character we relate to, I think we should give them like a grading of how relatable he is.
yeah, definitely like this
Right?
was, I think, how I used to feel like not in this extent though, but
Mm-mm,
like partially during my teenager phase,
mm-mm,
right?
mm-mm,
Um, but yeah, like it's long back.
mm-mm. Uh, how much would you rate him if you have to give him a number?
This book,
Yeah,
hmm, okay, that's an interesting question. Like out of 10, maybe 7.
out of 10, 7. That's quite generous of you, especially after you said you're not very fond of it.
No, no, I didn't like the protagonist, but the book was still like a good read, right?
Mm-mm. For me, I would say it was kind of 8 because I think a lot of it can be contributed to how well the writer has written all the thoughts the guy has. So in a sense, I could understand it. There's a really famous quote by Stephen King who says that telepathy is actually possible, where a writer writes and another person reads, and that's the telepathic conversation happening. And I could feel the telepathy happening for this case because I could just understand everything why he
Hmm.
was doing it, right? And sometimes I think, at least while reading the book, I felt that if I was of the same character disposition and I was not so far removed from it, especially in younger days, and if I was put in the similar situation, I would probably react in the same way as well. It's irrational for me now, but I can think that if my disposition was so, yeah, I could react the same way.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is it for now. This book was really fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did as well.
Bye bye.
So, what book do you want to read for next week?
Ah, right. I don't know. Like it's your turn, so you can decide.
Uh, I'm thinking about short novels,
Okay.
but yeah, there's not so many I can think about. I don't really want to read a long book, but I heard there's this book called Fahrenheit 451
Oh,
by,
I've heard about it actually. Yeah.
yeah, by Ray Bradbury.
Hmm.
Uh, Maybe we can read this for the next week.
Yeah, sure. How many pages is it? 256, eh?
Is it 256?
Yeah.
No, it says 156.
Okay, maybe it's like written big.
Okay, so it's 156, and yeah, we read 118 pages. 156 is slightly longer, and hopefully we can go longer and longer, and probably by the end of week 3, week 4, we can read something around 300 pages.
Mm.
And yeah, really get into it. I really want to recommend a Haruki Murakami book, but it's normally longer than 200 pages, so we'll have to wait for it. But after having a lot of existential, let's collect all the existential dread that we can with all the books we read, and then we can give our heart some respite with some light-hearted novels later on. But thank you very much, Anup. Yet again, great week for us. I really enjoy reading this, and I really want to thank you because if it was
Thank
not
you
for
for having
you,
me.
if it was not for you, then I would not be reading so many books throughout the week. So I would
Um,
have already gotten lazy in this challenge that we are doing to ourselves. So thank you
no
very much
problem.
again.
Same to you. Same to you.
Yeah, and we speak again next week, right?
Yeah, let's read this thing.